Welcome to the deep dive, where we, tear through a stack of sources and really pull out the core knowledge you need. Today, we're diving into a case that's, well, it's both incredibly tragic and, honestly, profoundly instructive. It really shows how sheer persistence and very specialized forensic analysis can overturn years of injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. Our depth dive today is really custom tailored for you, the listener. We're analyzing these detailed accounts of the death of 44-year-old Stacy Feldman back in 2015. It was a case initially just filed away as an accident, a slip and fall.
Right.
So our mission today is to dissect the evidence, the motive, and really that critical path that led to her husband, Bob Feldman, being convicted of premeditated murder. But it took 7 long years.
7 years.
Well,
Wow.
it really is a study in deception, maybe some systemic failure too, and definitely the power of the right expertise.
Okay, so let's unpack Stacy's life first. Give us a sense of who she was. She grew up in Meany, Indiana, the youngest of 3 sisters. And the sources, they really paint this picture of someone just, well, vibrant. Her sister, Susan Ullman, remembered her as daddy's little girl, someone who just radiated joy. She's often described as very feminine, apparently loved the color pink, and yeah, definitely the life of the party.
But she was much more than just charismatic. Stacy was, it seems, deeply rooted in her community, very dedicated to service. She was the president of the parent-teacher organization, the PTO at Southmore Elementary. And she also worked professionally for a nonprofit called Partners Seeking a Cure, which focused on liver disease research.
That's quite a commitment.
Yeah, and when you look at her dreams, they were pretty classic and straightforward. She really wanted to be a wife and a mother.
And she thought she'd found that future with Robert Feldman, known as Bob. He comes across as charismatic, older too, 14 years her senior. They got married around 2005. There was this beautiful ceremony in Montreal. It sounds like her dream wedding. At the Ritz, even wore a tiara.
Wow.
Yeah. They settled down in Denver, had 2 kids, and, at least from the outside, they projected this image of a perfect, successful life.
And that image, well, that's precisely what the sources show us, was really nothing more than a carefully constructed and deeply flawed facade.
Okay, so let's get into the cracks. The sources detail some pretty severe structural problems in their 10-year marriage. And the first big one, maybe the most insidious, was financial control.
Yeah, it's such a classic sign in domestic abuse situations, and here it was devastating. Stacy dreamed of being a stay-at-home mom, but the financial reality just didn't allow it. Bob was apparently a chronically underperforming salesman, so Stacy had to work basically to keep the lifestyle going, support the household.
Right.
But here's the really critical part, this economic asymmetry. The house, the mortgage, all the credit cards, they were exclusively in Bob's name.
So what does that mean, practically speaking, beyond just, bad financial planning?
It means total financial bondage, essentially. Stacy was left completely vulnerable. She had no independent access to funds, no assets in her name. And Bob, well, he actively leveraged this. He turned it into emotional manipulation. He apparently threatened her constantly, saying if she ever tried to leave him, he'd take the kids and make sure she was left with absolutely nothing. He'd basically isolated her.
That's terrifying. And this isolation, it was punctuated by chronic infidelity, wasn't it? Bob wasn't just straying occasionally.
Oh, no. He was operating like a complex system of deception. He had multiple dating profiles, Tinder, Match, others.
Using fake names?
Yeah, aliases like Robert Wolf, Mike Reed. And what's really key to understanding his mindset, I think, is how thoroughly he committed to the lies. He constantly shifted his backstory. Sometimes he was a divorced conservative Jew, sometimes reformed. His age varied, mid-40s, mid-50s, depending on who he was talking to.
So a calculated, ongoing effort to live this secret life.
Pretty much. It really suggests that.
And this deception, it leads us right to the catalyst. In February 2015, a woman named Susan McBride. Bob matched with her on Tinder. He was using the alias Robert Wolf. Their first date, it seemed promising, but Susan McBride apparently had this immediate gut feeling something was off when she couldn't find him online.
Right, and Bob, of course, had a ready-made excuse for that, didn't he? He claimed he had to use fake names because, get this, he was being stalked.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that level of pathological lying is just a huge red flag. But despite her misgivings, she did continue seeing him, briefly. They were intimate on February 26th. That's just 3 days before Stacy died. But then, immediately after that, Bob pulled away, which just confirmed Susan's suspicions all over again.
And this time, Susan McBride wasn't just going to let it go. She did her own digging. She used her research skills and pretty quickly found Stacy listed online as the PTO president at the kids' school. And then it hits her school. Robert Wolf isn't divorced. He's married with kids.
Yeah. And this puts Susan McBride in this incredibly tough spot. I mean, she could have just walked away, deleted his number, right? But the sources show she chose to do what she felt was right for Stacy. She decided to break the silence Bob had built around his marriage.
Which brings us to March 1st, 2015. The timeline really starts to accelerate towards tragedy here. At 6:20 in the morning, Susan McBride sends that crucial email to Stacy. She was direct, but the tone seems compassionate. She explained she'd met Bob on Tinder, revealed the infidelity, expressed her own shock. She actually wrote, "My name's Susan McBride. If you're not separated, you should know that he's cheating on you." And critically, she forwarded their text messages as proof.
This is the moment, isn't it, where the whole thing shifts from just infidelity to actual motive for murder. Because shortly before 9 a.m. that same morning, Stacy called Susan McBride. It was only a 5-minute call. Susan McBride later recalled Stacy sounded sweet and kind, not angry. Stacy even mentioned Bob had cheated before. But then Stacy said the 4 words that changed everything.
"I'm done with him."
Exactly. That phrase becomes the absolute linchpin for the prosecution years down the road. That simple declaration, made just hours before she died, meant Stacy was actively choosing to dismantle the whole life Bob controlled. He stood to lose everything: the house, the kids, his reputation, his financial shield. So in his mind, he suddenly had a definitive motive to stop her leaving.
How? By killing her.
That's what the prosecution argued and what the jury ultimately believed.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, from a legal standpoint, how a conversation like that between two women who'd never even met becomes this authenticated, concrete motive in a murder trial. It gives such a clear window into the victim's state of mind right before the crime.
It totally removes the possibility that, maybe they were working things out, that the marriage was ongoing, Stacy's decision to leave. That transformed Bob's situation from just, a messy affair he might recover from into a complete collapse of his controlled world.
Okay, let's follow the rest of that Sunday, March 1st. At 8:30 a.m., Bob drops the kids off at Temple Sinai for religious school. Said she was supposed to pick them up at noon. There was a Purim carnival they were going to, but noon comes and goes.
And Stacy doesn't show up. The school staff, knowing the family's usually reliable, they call Stacy's cell first. No answer. Then they call Bob. And this is where the clock really starts ticking on his inconsistencies. When they first called him, Bob apparently said, yeah, he'd pick the kids up shortly. Okay. But by 12:45 p.m., he still hadn't arrived. The school calls again. And now his story completely changes.
What's the new version?
Now he claims he thought a family friend was supposed to get the children, which is a direct, immediate contradiction to what he just said less than an hour before. He's already scrambling, you see, trying to cover that time gap between roughly 9 a.m. when he knew Stacy was leaving him and noon.
He finally shows up at 1:05 p.m. And even the teacher who spoke with him noted his behavior was off. He seemed visibly disheveled, acted curtly.
And the source material mentions this was a really striking contrast to his usual, charismatic self.
Okay. And then, crucially, he spends the next 2 hours deliberately avoiding going home.
Exactly. From 1 near 5 p.m. until about 3 p.m., he takes the kids to the Purim Carnival, then to a bicycle shop. He's essentially running down the clock, making sure the kids are nowhere near the house, while he, presumably, is finalizing the staging of the scene.
And that staging plan, it seems, is also revealed in what he told his daughter when they finally did get home.
Yes, exactly. His daughter later testified about this. Bob told her to go downstairs, put her coat away, specifically told her not to go upstairs to see her mom right away.
So, calculated separation. Making sure no one sees the scene before he makes the call.
That's the inference, yes. Ensuring no witness sees the initial scene before he dials 911.
Which he does around 3 p.m. He makes that dramatic 911 call. "Oh my God, I need help. Please help me, please. My wife's not breathing." He claimed he found Stacy unconscious in the shower, said the water was running, he pulled her out, and he was doing CPR.
Right. The staging was elaborate, yes, but it was flawed from the start. First responders get there around 3:40 p.m., and they immediately spot this huge inconsistency. Despite Bob claiming he pulled Stacy from a running shower, there was absolutely no water on the bathroom floor.
None at all.
None. Firefighters noted, in cases where someone is pulled from a tub or shower, water gets everywhere, it's unavoidable, so the absence of water. It strongly suggested either there was no contact with running water or there'd been a hasty cleanup. Either way, it didn't fit his story.
And the 911 audio itself, that became evidence too, right? Evidence of the deception.
Absolutely. When investigators listened back to the recording, they noticed the complete lack of sounds you'd expect with effective CPR. No rhythmic chest compressions, no sounds of rescue breaths, nothing. Instead, what they did hear on the recording were distinct sounds suggesting staging. Specifically, a toilet flushing. And the sound of items being knocked over, moved around.
So while he's on the phone pretending to save her.
The audio suggests he was actually tidying up, arranging the scene to fit his narrative.
And then there was his behavior at the scene. Detective Randy Dennison, the firefighters, they described him using words like overacting, performative, overdramatic.
Yeah, and purposely not cooperative. It sounds like, as you said, a really bad actor giving a terrible performance.
Not typical for someone discovering their spouse.
Not at all. That's the core of the red flags, right? A genuinely grieving or shocked spouse usually submits to authority. They want help. Bob's behavior was the opposite. He was kind of blocking access, performing grief, and that immediately alerted seasoned officers that something was very wrong here. Foul play was a strong possibility right from the start.
Okay, so you got all these inconsistencies stacking up. The disheveled look, the changing timeline, the totally dry bathroom floor, the suspicious 911 audio. Why did the case stall immediately then?
Well, it stalled primarily because of the initial medical ruling. It all hinged on the complexity of the injuries and how they were interpreted. The autopsy was done the next day, March 2nd, by Dr. Kelly Kobylanski. And the source material notes she was relatively inexperienced at the time. This was apparently one of her first solo autopsies. And she was faced with just a massive amount of physical trauma.
How extensive are we talking?
Stacy had sustained more than 80 separate injuries. We're talking various bruises, hemorrhages, abrasions. She even had a chipped tooth. And crucially, Dr. Kobylanski also noted the presence of petechial hemorrhages in Stacy's eyes. Those tiny burst blood vessels.
Let's just pause on that for a second. Petechial hemorrhages. Yeah. For listeners who might not know, what are they exactly and why are they so significant in cases like this?
Right. So they happen when there's sustained significant pressure applied to the neck or chest. It interrupts the blood flow from the head. That pressure prevents the venous blood from returning, causing tiny capillaries, especially around the eyes and sometimes the face, to burst under the pressure. Now, while they can occasionally be caused by things like violent vomiting or extreme coughing fits, finding them together with dozens of other injuries and a suspicious scene, that makes them a really classic indicator of manual strangulation or suffocation.
So if they found 80 injuries and these specific hemorrhages, how on earth could the cause of death still be listed as undetermined?
Because, well, the injuries were hard to categorize neatly without a specific framework. They clearly didn't fit an accidental fall profile. But without that specialized context, specifically linking the eye hemorrhages and all the bruising patterns directly to domestic violence strangulation, well, the medical examiner felt she couldn't definitively rule it homicide.
So she hedged her bets.
Essentially, yes. The official cause and manner of death were listed as undetermined. And that ruling is just devastating for an investigation. It systematically prevents the police and prosecutors from moving forward with murder charges. It effectively shelved the case, kept it in limbo for years.
And while the case was stuck in that limbo, Bob was busy trying to solidify his story, lying repeatedly to the police. We mentioned his shifting accounts of the morning.
Yeah. Initially, he claimed he'd gone to work or maybe the gym. Then later, he said he was meeting a colleague to check on bus advertisements. But his final sort of full narrative was clearly designed to explain away that long gap between roughly 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. He claimed Stacy was just tired, maybe sleeping when he left around 8:30, that he came back around noon, called out to her, changed his clothes, cleaned the garage because supposedly a shelf had fallen.
The shelf again?
Right, and then he went to a park to work out. I mean, it's this highly detailed, almost too detailed attempt to account for every single minute, and specifically designed to avoid any time he might have spent with Stacy after she got that email from Susan McBride.
And he also tried to smear Stacy's reputation, didn't he? Claiming she was impaired.
Yes, a really nasty tactic. He specifically claimed Stacy had consumed cannabis edibles the night before, the implication being she was too impaired to function properly, maybe caused her own fall.
Classic victim blaming.
Exactly, trying to explain away the suspicious circumstances. But the toxicology reports from the autopsy, completely clear. No signs of THC in her system whatsoever. He also falsely claimed she'd been unwell, missed work for days, again trying to paint this picture of an already ailing woman who might just collapse. These lies were actually crucial evidence later on, showing his consciousness of guilt, his pattern of concealment, even if they couldn't prove the homicide itself at the time.
Okay, now let's circle back to that financial red flag. Because this is where the motive gets, well, extremely lucrative for Bob. Just months after Stacy died, he collects a massive payout,
A
right?
huge payout, $750,000 from Stacy's life insurance policy. That financial gain, it served as both the potential motive and the immediate reward for her death. And if you look closer at the policy itself, it was purchased about 5 years earlier, the asymmetry is really glaring. While he had this substantial policy on her life, there was no reciprocal policy on his own life.
That's not normal, is it, for a couple planning financially?
Highly irregular for what should be a mutual financial safeguard. Prosecutors later argued this specific detail suggested the policy wasn't really a mutual investment. It looked more like, potentially, a premeditated plan for his own personal financial gain.
That's like the ultimate form of that financial control we talked about earlier. He literally used her life to buy himself freedom and cash.
Pretty much. And his behavior after her death only compounded the suspicion. The investigation confirmed his pattern of extensive infidelity continued, and his calculated dishonesty even extended into, believe it or not, grief counseling. He met a woman named Stephanie Shoemaker at a Grief the Pork group. He told her yet another lie, claiming Stacy had died of cancer.
Unbelievable.
And then, according to her testimony, he subsequently sexually assaulted her at his home. So despite this staggering pattern, deception, control, infidelity, even assault, the case remained officially closed because of that undetermined ruling. The only person, it seems, who absolutely refused to let this case die was Stacy's sister, Susan Ullman. She was living in Boston when she got the call about Stacy's death. Her response was immediate, just visceral. She said her immediate reaction was that her husband had killed her. She simply did not buy the story of an accidental bathroom fall. Not for a second.
And she knew Bob's character well enough, presumably, to recognize a pattern. She remembered him not just as maybe a struggling salesman, but as a bit of a schemer.
Exactly. The sources mentioned this really telling anecdote about him. Apparently, he used to bring broken suitcases to airports specifically to demand replacements, angling for nicer, more expensive models.
Huh. Like a small-time scam artist.
Kind of paints him as someone always looking for an angle, always seeking advantage through these minor scams. And Susan saw how that could escalate to a life or death level of deception. She knew about his financial control, the threats he made about taking the children, and this deep certainty, this conviction, it fueled her fight for the next 7 years.
But, personal conviction, a gut feeling, that's not enough to overturn a medical examiner's ruling, is it? How did she bridge that gap, go from intuition to, like, an actionable forensic strategy?
That took time. Nearly 2 years into this stall, a relative of Susan's, who was a psychologist, provided that crucial analytical link. The psychologist suggested that the dynamic Susan was describing, the financial control, the threats, the sudden unexplained death, it perfectly fit this established pattern of domestic violence escalation that often culminates in murder. And that was the framework Susan needed. It gave her a direction.
Okay, so that suggestion led her to the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. What exactly is that? Why was that the right place to turn?
Well, they specialize in understanding the dynamics and, maybe more importantly, the often very subtle forensic evidence of both non-lethal and lethal domestic strangulation. Their whole focus is on filling that knowledge gap that so often leaves cases like Stacy's stuck in that undetermined category. See, strangulation is often misidentified. It might look like simple bruising or maybe attributed to a fall because the external signs of compression on the neck can fade quite quickly. But the internal damage leaves specific markers if you know what to look for.
Right. So they connected Susan and also Detective Dennison, the original detective who always harbored suspicions, with a person who would ultimately be the game changer, Dr. Bill Smock.
Dr. Smock, yeah, he's a critical figure in this whole story. He's not just an academic. He's a working police pathologist, a seasoned ER doctor, and he has a fellowship in forensics. He's considered one of the absolute foremost experts in analyzing the physical evidence of domestic violence strangulation. He even pioneered a technique called living forensics, which applies both to living victims and, crucially here, to post-mortem reviews.
That's quite a resume. He's been involved in thousands of autopsies, served as an expert in huge cases like the Derek Chauvin trial. What is his success rate? You mentioned it was high. Tell us about maybe the blind spots in standard initial autopsy procedures.
While his track record is astonishing, apparently a 100% conviction rate in strangulation cases where his specialized techniques were brought in. And that tells us that standard autopsy procedures often do fail to correctly interpret that whole constellation of subtle injuries left by manual strangulation, especially when the killer has tried to stage the scene. Dr. Smock has the specific expertise to connect those petechial hemorrhages with specific bruising patterns, with things like clothing imprints. He can basically see the story the body is telling when others might just see ambiguous trauma.
Okay, so while Susan Ullman is building this crucial alliance with Dr. Smock, Susan McBride, the woman Bob met on Tinder, the catalyst, she makes another discovery. One that provides his final emotional confirmation of the motive.
Yes. This was about 3 months after Stacy's death in June 2015. Susan McBride was apparently thinking about Bob, searched for him online, maybe expecting to find divorce records or something. Instead, she found Stacy Feldman's obituary, dated March 1st. And she immediately recognized that chilling alignment, the timeline. Stacy was murdered the very same day she told Susan McBride she was leaving Bob. She recalled feeling physically ill and just knew instantly that that was why Stacy was dead.
Wow. That realization must have been horrifying.
Absolutely. And it prompted her to contact the Denver police immediately. She provided that concrete external confirmation of both the timeline and the motive. Stacy was murdered because she was done with him. So Dr. Smock's direct involvement really began in earnest in 2017. That's nearly 3 years after Stacy died. And he spent months just meticulously reviewing every single piece of evidence: the initial autopsy report, the tox reports, hundreds of crime scene photos, body photographs. Everything. His goal was clear: to prove, forensically, that this undetermined death was actually a concealed homicide.
So he had to basically reinterpret all the data from that first autopsy. What did he conclude about those 80-plus injuries?
He ruled out Bob's explanations completely. He determined these were absolutely not injuries from a simple slip and fall, nor were they consistent with CPR or even being roughly pulled from a bathtub. Dr. Smock concluded the injuries were consistent with only one thing: a violent, prolonged assault. He actually termed it a vicious beatdown in the source material.
And his official conclusion on the cause of death was suffocation, strangulation, or a combination of both. Can you just briefly clarify the forensic difference there for us?
Sure. So strangulation refers specifically to external pressure on the neck, whether it's manual, like with hands or using a ligature, or some other object that constricts blood flow or the airway. Suffocation, on the other hand, means blocking the nose and mouth, preventing oxygen from getting in, like smothering. Based on all the evidence, Dr. Smock believed Bob likely employed both techniques, perhaps alternating, to ensure death.
And how did Dr. Smock reconstruct the actual attack, the method?
Well, his analysis indicated Bob attacked Stacy while she was still fully clothed. This is key. He believed Bob likely straddled her body, probably pinning her down. He thought Bob used his knees to hold down her upper arms while he simultaneously choked and suffocated her. It's a method that maximizes control and immobilization of the victim.
The specifics of the physical evidence, that's what made his analysis so compelling in court, right? What were those key forensic details that proved homicide and blew up Bob's story?
Yeah, we can break it down into maybe 4 critical categories he identified. First, defensive wounds. Stacy had bruising and abrasions on the backs of her hands. These are typical defensive wounds, consistent with someone trying desperately to push an attacker away.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, pressure points. There was specific bruising on her upper arms, and the pattern of that bruising matched perfectly with what you'd expect from someone's knees, pressing down extremely hard, forcing her arms down against the ground or another surface.
Consistent with being straddled and pinned. And the third point, that one directly refutes the whole shower story, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial, yes. Dr. Smock discovered clear evidence of fabric imprints pressed into her skin. This proved, pretty conclusively, that she was dressed when the assault began. It completely shattered Bob's claim that he found her naked in a running shower. And further undermining that staging, Stacy was found still wearing a dress watch on her left wrist. I mean, who showers wearing a dress watch? It makes no sense.
Right, so the body wasn't just telling a story, it was actively contradicting the killer's narrative in really painful detail. What about the physical staging? That metal shelf Bob claimed had fallen on her.
Another critical piece. Dr. Smock noted that while there was an imprint on Stacy's skin consistent with contact with the metal shelf, there was no bruising found around that shelf imprint. See, if a heavy object falls on a living person, the body reacts. You get bruising, swelling due to the trauma and blood flow. The complete absence of bruising around that imprint proves she was already dead when her body came into contact with the shelf. It meant the shelf incident, like the rest of the scene, was staged after the murder, likely to try and mimic injuries from an accidental, uncontrolled fall.
That level of cold, calculated staging after the fact, it's chilling. Dr. Smock also addressed the issue of the victim's suffering, which is often such a key point in these domestic violence homicides.
He did, and he provided this terrible sort of clinical quantification of the violence. He estimated that Bob could have rendered Stacy unconscious in probably just 5 to 10 seconds by applying pressure to her neck. And she likely would have stopped breathing completely within maybe 1 to 2.5 minutes. When asked directly in court if she suffered during this, his reply was simple and direct: "Yes, ma'am." And the sheer number of injuries, those 80-plus marks, confirms it wasn't quick. It was a prolonged, violent fight for her life before she was overcome.
So with Dr. Smock's objective scientific evidence finally ruling the death a homicide, the Denver DA's office at last had the undeniable proof they needed. They could overturn that old, undetermined ruling and finally move forward with prosecution.
And so Bob Feldman was arrested on February 16th, 2018. That's nearly 3 full years after Stacy's death. It marked the end of that long investigative stall. He was actually granted bond $1 million and placed on house arrest. But that immediately led to this significant legal battle over the use of that life insurance money.
That's just the ultimate awful irony, isn't it? He potentially used the money that was the motive for the murder to pay for his defense against the murder charge.
Precisely. And the Colorado Supreme Court ultimately upheld a lower court ruling that allowed Bob to use $550,000 of that $750,000 payout from Stacy's policy to hire his top-tier criminal defense team.
That must have been a massive slap in the face to Stacy's family.
Absolutely. A huge insult, especially after they had fought so hard for so long, arguing that money was tainted by the crime itself.
And adding to the delays, the CO-19 pandemic hit, causing repeated postponements, just stretching out the family's wait for justice even longer.
Yeah.
And even while he was under supposedly strict house arrest, Bob apparently couldn't even follow basic rules.
No. He got caught violating the terms. He was posting online routes of unauthorized bicycle rides he was taking all over Denver. It really demonstrated, you could argue, a profound lack of regard for the seriousness of the charges, for the legal system itself, maybe suggesting he felt kind of untouchable.
The trial finally got underway in April 2022. It was a 9-day trial, presided over by Judge Edward Bronin. The prosecution, led by Maggie Conboy, knew their strongest witness wasn't a person but the evidence itself. Their strategy was simple but powerful. Stacy Feldman can't tell you what happened that day, but her body can.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Smock was, as expected, the absolute star witness for the prosecution.
Yeah.
He actually used a mannequin in court to vividly, specifically demonstrate to the jury exactly how Bob likely straddled and choked Stacy. He connected every single bruise, every hemorrhage back to that method of attack. That kind of visual demonstration, combined with his incredibly detailed forensic reports, it was just devastatingly effective. Very hard for the defense to counter.
And there was key non-forensic testimony too, right? Solidifying the motive.
Yes. Susan McBride testified about that final, crucial phone call, confirming Stacy's clear intent to leave him. And the Feldman's own daughter, who was 16 by the time of the trial, testified that the morning of her mother's death had seemed completely normal, which directly contradicted Bob's fabricated stories about Stacy being ill or sleeping late. The defense attorney, Jeffrey Pagluka, his main strategist seemed to be attacking Dr. Smock personally. He tried to paint him as just a hired gun and a narcissist. The defense argued the whole case was just circumstantial, based on gossip and rumor, and that Stacy's death was simply a tragedy, not a homicide. But, the concrete evidence of the staged scene, the lack of water, the fabric imprints, the watch, the non-bruised shelf trauma, it just pointed too strongly towards homicide.
And the jury saw through it. After deliberating for less than 3 hours.
Less than 3 hours, they came back with the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Justice, though delayed by 7 incredibly long years, was finally achieved.
Bob's reaction?
Zero remorse, apparently. He offered no statement, no apology when he was asked at sentencing, just a simple no. The victim impact statements, though, were heartbreaking. Stacy's mother, Dorothy Melman, directly condemned him for the ultimate betrayal. "If you really loved your children, you wouldn't have killed their mother. You are evil."
And Susan Ullman, the sister who fought for so long?
She expressed just this deep sense of relief for the whole family. "I have been fighting for this for 7 years because my sister deserves to rest in peace."
Did Bob appeal?
Oh, immediately. But in November 2024, the Colorado Court of Appeals issued this decisive 51-page decision. They unanimously affirmed his conviction. And crucially, the appeals court explicitly rejected the defense's argument that Dr. Smock's specialized testimony had somehow improperly overridden the initial county coroner's undetermined ruling. So that decision really cements the legal validity, the importance of bringing in specialized forensic review to overturn ambiguous initial findings in complex cases like this.
And Stacy's legacy, it now extends beyond just the courtroom conviction, doesn't it?
It does. Bob was ordered to pay over $111,000, specifically for his children's long-term therapy costs, acknowledging the profound trauma he inflicted. And Stacy's fund was created. It provides legal assistance to other domestic violence survivors, trying to ensure they don't face the same kinds of financial and legal roadblocks that Stacy encountered.
And Susan Ullman?
She's become an advocate herself, working on domestic violence awareness with the Alliance for Hope International. So this conviction, ultimately, it really stands as a testament to what the sources called the sisterhood. Susan Ullman's relentless determination, Susan McBride's courage in coming forward with the motive, and Dr. Smock's specialized forensic knowledge that finally allowed Stacy's body to speak the truth.
Okay, so if you followed us through this really intense deep dive, what are the critical takeaways? What's the core knowledge we've pulled from all these sources?
Well, I think the primary takeaway, maybe the biggest one, is the profound importance of specialized forensic review, particularly in cases where you suspect domestic violence strangulation. Initial autopsies, which often focus on more obvious, massive trauma, they can easily fail to correctly interpret that whole constellation of subtle injuries, the petechiae, the specific bruising patterns, especially when a killer has actively tried to stage the scene. It really tells us we have to be willing to look beyond an initial official ruling if the context feels suspicious.
Right. And second, this case is just a perfect, albeit tragic, illustration of that terrible progression, from financial and emotional control straight to lethal violence. The motive here was fundamentally about control. Stacy was murdered, it seems, because she was done with him, because she threatened Bob's carefully constructed financial and familial fortress. And that specific timeline gave the prosecution the clear legal why.
Exactly. And finally, I think we see how staging a scene, no matter how meticulously someone might think they've planned it, whether it's the tiny detail of no water on the floor or a misplaced watch or fabricating an injury from a supposedly fallen shelf, it invariably leaves behind specific measurable inconsistencies. And those inconsistencies can, and ultimately did here, betray the killer if they're examined by someone with the right expertise.
Yeah. This entire case really hinged on Dr. Smock's ability to read the physical trauma in a way the initial investigator, despite noting over 80 injuries, just couldn't definitively categorize. And that led to that undetermined ruling, allowing the case to stall for 7 years. So it really raises an important final question for you, the listener, to think about. What systemic changes, or maybe mandatory investigative training benchmarks, could possibly be implemented to ensure that first responders, and especially initial medical examiners, are immediately equipped to recognize and properly document those specific, often subtle, signs of concealed manual strangulation? Could doing so significantly reduce the agonizing time victims' families, like Stacy Feldman's, have to wait for justice in these incredibly difficult cases?